Hi, Paula. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I suppose just to let my listeners know about you, this is the lovely Paula Prendeville. She is a chartered educational psychologist and an associate fellow at the British Psychological Society. She works in a specialist child development clinic, and she also teaches on professional psychology training courses, both clinical and educationally speaking, in University College Dublin. Now, that is just a very small part of the expertise that Paula brings to the field of autism every day. So Paula, again, thank you so much for coming on the air today.
Sharon, it's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to having a chat with you today.
Fab. I suppose, Paula, we're going to get right started to it because I do have a number of questions, and I'd love for people to hear you speak rather than me speak, and for you to share all of this wonderful expertise and specialism that you have. So I'm going to start with your first question, if that's okay. So I suppose just to give people a little bit of background on you, will you tell people, how did you initially decide to start working in the field of autism?
Well, I have to say, firstly, I'm an accidental psychologist, and I'm a psychologist because of my experiences of working with individuals with autism. I never set out in my professional career to be a psychologist, but this is where I've ended up. So I was working for a long time as a primary teacher, and I worked in teacher training as well for quite a while, in primary teacher training for quite a while. And due to family circumstances, I moved to Cork, and I was teaching in a school, and the school had a very progressive, inclusive view of supporting children with special education needs. And the principal approached me and asked me, would I set up a specialist class for children with ASD.
Fantastic.
And I was very fortunate to start the class with two wonderful little girls. And after the second year, I thought, this is really interesting. I think I could make a bigger contribution. So I went back and retrained as an educational psychologist then. So that was my first foray into autism formally.
Fantastic. So you were motivated by the needs of these little people that you were working with.
Oh, absolutely.
Fantastic.
And not even that, just to see how they progressed by being in a class attached to mainstream, some of your listeners might know as a satellite class.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just that, developing the relationships with the parents and working alongside the parents to support the children. It was a great privilege and a great start on this journey for me, actually, my autism journey.
Fantastic. Paula, will you tell my listeners what a strengths-based approach to support is, and why it's actually so important that it is the focus of any intervention or support that we deliver for our young autistic individuals?
That's such a wonderful question, and Sharon, and something I feel very passionate about. I suppose we know from the history of autism that it has had a bit of a grey past, to say the least, and it hasn't been a good journey for a lot of individuals and families who've been on this journey for quite a long time, and a multi-generational journey. So for a long time, autism was looked as very much as a deficit approach, that we viewed it as something being wrong with the individual, and it was based around their diagnosis. But we know from the World Health Organization that they advocate for a strength-based approach, which is supporting the needs of the person and the strengths of the person, and working from those strengths and supporting them from that perspective. And it emulates what we would know as the social model of disability, where we look at disability, where we support the person to develop a model and skills that they can make them as sociable in the world and function as best that they can within that world. So that would be it. And a more, breaking it down more, when I look at a strength-based approach, I look at the domains that the World Health Organization advocate, and that would be looking at someone's cognition, their understanding, their communicative skills, their self-care skills, their participation in society, etc. And that's what we look at when we plan and support individuals in a strength-based way.
Fantastic. I suppose, Paula, in my experience, when we want to set a child up for success, it makes the most sense to acknowledge their wonderful strengths and to propel them forward from those points, rather than, as we've previously seen, I suppose, people being it being considered more appropriate to change a person to suit the environment that they're in, rather than changing the environment to suit the person. Looking at that looking at the individual strengths and making sure that they are set up for success always through those strengths. Does that make sense? It's
absolutely, yes. And we call that, I mean, from an education point of view, it's scaffolding. That's for the teachers and some of the professionals that might be listening, that Vygotsky approach, where you look at where the child is and where you want them to be. So you cannot look at it from a deficit point of view, because you need to see what they're able to do, and you need to scaffold those skills to make them more independent. And that's really the essence of a strengths-based approach.
And I suppose the other positive thing about that, Paula, is that when we do focus on the child's strength, we're also minding mental well-being and so on as well, where we're building their self-confidence, we're building their sense of self and the child's trust in their own ability, so that they believe themselves to be equally important and equally capable as that of their peers.
Yeah, and you struck on something very important there around peers. I think that for a lot of your listeners, particularly those with young children, that so much of the planning and the supports that they get in school are based around their educational planning, and the idea about a strength-based approach is actually looking at the individual from a more holistic point of view. And sometimes that can be hard for people to think about that, like what self-care skills can I do in the school and teach the child to make them more independent and to do things. I know of some schools that do wonderful work around cookery classes, for example, that rather than having a child getting support for the literacy, that they actually teach the literacy through cookery programs. And it's fantastic, because it means that they can go off home and generalize those skills to other settings. And I think that is a key part to the strength-based approach, that we identify skills that we want to teach a person to enhance their quality of life, to make them more independent, but also support them to generalize those skills to other settings as well. And it really is a very creative, outside the box is kind of the way to go. So, and that can be hard for people, but it's it's very important that we all keep an open mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose coming back to that strengths focus again, when you think about a young person who potentially has difficulty with literacy, for example, it doesn't serve any real purpose for that child, mental well-being focused most particularly, to make them focus again and again and again on trying to learn something that perhaps is outside of their reach. I know that in this house, many moons ago now at this point, I have a young person who is so severely dyslexic that he struggled. We did so many hours of Bloomingwell toe-by-toe programs and so on and so forth. And actually what we decided upon as a family in the end was that it was really important that he had functional literacy skills, so that he could independently look at the TV guide, for example, or look at read medication boxes and so on and so forth, and look at his mail and be able to answer, look at his post read and see whether or not something was important or not. And actually when we took the pressure off to learn in that very conventional way, we then found that because the pressure was off, he started to engage with the more conventional literacy piece anyway. Do you know? So I suppose it does come back again always to that focusing and individualizing to meet the child's needs.
Yeah, and the other thing that, that strikes me of what you were saying there is around the readiness and taking the stress off. So for him, when the stress was taken off him, he was more ready to actually engage with it on his terms. And that piece, that one line on his or her or their terms, is absolutely key to this. And maybe, I suppose, when your son that you were talking about there, that maybe when he was at it, we weren't, in his early days, we didn't have the luxury of having all these very accessible assistive technology devices that we have on our phones. And that now, and it really does get to the stage that if a person really struggles with the reading and they're not responding to the intervention that they get, and everything that you've tried, there is no point, pardon the metaphor that I'm going to use, is flogging a dead horse. This is not going to work. They're never going to read in this conventional manner. And there's so many amazing alternative, creative ways of actually getting your message across. I met a little girl recently, and she has really struggled to do basic addition, and she's bright, but her needs are very varied. And the mum was like, we've tried this, it's just not working. We've tried Numicon, it's not working. And I just say to her, will you please get out Alexa or Siri or whatever, artificial intelligence that you have on your phone. And if she needs to know what 35 and 20 are, if she's adding up something in a shop, that she can just pick up her phone, talk into her phone, get the answer, and that she gets that information in another way. And it's so important that we recognize the value of assistive technologies and artificial intelligence to support our young people to navigate their way in the world in a different way to maybe their parents and grandparents might have been used to, but it means that it isn't a barrier to them participating and getting on with things. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I suppose we all pull out our phones, we all get out our calculators, we all get out our I know I speak to text these days and so on. We all use our phones in a multitude of different ways. And these are all very socially appropriate ways in which to engage with different aspects of society and so on. So it actually works, I suppose it works again to scaffold the child and to make sure that they do become beautifully and wonderfully independent, and that they can realize their potential moving forward. Do you know?
Yes.
Paula, can I ask you, what factors of a person's environment can impact then on an autistic individual's ability to function?
So environment is, as we know, it's a very wide term.
Yeah.
It's huge. But I'm going to start with the person themselves. So when we talk about environment, we talk about the internal environment actually within the person themselves, and then the external environment. So, I mean, when I look at environment, it's very much in the context of behavior. And when young people and adults are really struggling around trying to communicate things that are going on in their environment, that despite having a great vocabulary and the ability to use that socially, when they're stressed out, that vocabulary might diminish or maybe mightn't be there at all.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the internal environment, we think about, well, is the person in pain? Are they hungry? Are they exhausted? Is there something within their domain that is actually impacting on their sensory needs?
Yeah.
And the sensory piece is absolutely massive. I mean, for any of your listeners that think about senses, we think about the typical 5 senses: the hearing, the touch, the listening, all of those. And there are additional senses for those. Those of us that have been fortunate enough work with occupational therapists will know that a person's sense of movement and a sense of space is very important to them as well.
Yeah.
So you have to have, I feel that we all need to be a bit Sherlock Holmesy on all of this, and actually take a step back and look at the person to see how they're interacting with their environment. Is it a positive, a safe, supportive environment for them? Or is it an environment that is actually stressing them out to the extent that they're actually withdrawing from that environment completely? Or that there are some triggers within the environment that is causing untold stress for them, that really they're finding it very hard to function at any level at all.
Yeah.
And, the big piece is the environment of the school. Typically in home environments, for the most part, parents are raising, a child with autism. They may not have anticipated at the start that that's what was going on with them, but a lot of parents are very attuned and get a sense of what's going on and what their needs are for their child. And they could have been adapting the environment for years and recognizing that that was just their normal in the home environment. And maybe when they go into another house, they realize, oh my goodness, I was doing so much in my son or daughter's environment to support them. But the challenges really arise in schools. I mean, Sharon, I know that this is a big part of the work that you do, and we could write a book on the impact of environment, but people need to be very aware that the key to an individual with autism or autistic, a key to their ability to engage in the world is based to a huge extent on how the environment is there to support them or possibly not support them, as the case may be.
Absolutely. And I suppose just for any parents who might be listening in, I know you mentioned that kind of internal environment there, Paula. I know there is a lady by the name of Kelly Maller who does present training courses and so on the interoceptive sense, that sense around reading, that kind of emotional piece, that knowing whether you're hungry or thirsty, tired, too hot or too cold or whatever. But it actually also informs, it's not just that homeostatic emotion it also informs the affective emotion. So if you've got a kid who finds it harder to read whether or not they're hot or cold, or if they become very, very dysregulated quite frequently with regards to that kind of internal sense, it makes sense then that the affective emotion, that whether or not they're feeling happy or sad or safe indeed, can be more difficult for them to articulate in that case. Do you know? So I suppose it's worth people checking out the interoceptive curriculum as well, because there's a huge amount of research and evidence base around that now as well. But I think you're right, absolutely, that when we look at the environment, that it is about looking at that multifaceted and multi-layered piece, and most particularly starting with the individual, because the environment can be however it is, but if the individual isn't feeling safe, the individual isn't going to access and successfully access a curriculum or the environment, full stop.
Yeah, and that leads me on, you alluded to this a minute ago, was that whole idea of the emotional regulation.
Yeah.
The piece is around emotional understanding, and a lot of people really struggle to get their head around this, that, you know, I frequently come across individuals who are very able in school, that have managed very well, and actually teenagers and adults, older and younger adults, who, despite having a great vocabulary and having the ability to be very articulate and expressing about whatever it might be their interests are, when it comes to the emotional repertoire, it's really tough. So if a person is struggling and they're very stressed out, like they at the best of times, the understanding of emotions is very difficult for individuals with autism. It is exceptionally difficult when they're very stressed out.
Yeah.
And when we talk about emotions, we talk about the word, the feeling, I'm happy, sad, hungry, or whatever. So that's one layer. Another layer is recognizing how your body is for that feeling. So what you were saying, that internal homeostasis, right? So when I am tired, this is how I feel inside my body. I feel heavy. People struggle to say that.
Yeah.
The next piece then is actually knowing what to do to manage that emotion and to regulate that emotion. So it could be that you say it, that you talk to somebody about it. But if you have difficulty really recognizing that emotion, that's really hard.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then the final piece then is that if you are in an environment where somebody else is feeling an emotion, that you have the ability to actually respond appropriately to that emotion or not. And that's that theory of mind difficulty that we tend to see. So emotions are a minefield, and certainly they fit very much into the environment and fit into that sensory regulation or dysregulation, the case may be. So it's so important to really work on emotional awareness, emotional understanding, emotional regulation, all of that. It's absolutely key.
Absolutely. And I suppose 2 points in that, Paula, is that first of all, I would have spoken most recently with Professor Olga Bogdashina. I know she's another guest for the Cork Autism Conference this year, and she would have spoken very adeptly about emotional resonance, and that kind of resonance within the environment, resonating with the difficulties that one might be having, and so on and so forth. And not actually, I suppose, knowing that actually you're picking up on someone else's emotion, that there's that sensitive person piece, if that makes sense. I suppose that's the first thing that I'd say. And then along with that, I suppose, when we think about somebody feeling however they feel, and not being able to not even knowing what it is, it's really important, first and foremost, that the person is, that they do understand. But it's even more important that people realize that it's not a tabletop activity, that person needs to be taught about emotion in the context that that emotion is being experienced. So I know in this house, I often kind of go, do you know, I feel really happy today, and this is why I'm happy. Or look, I feel quite sad, and this is why I feel quite sad. Or naming it for the children in this house when they're actually in the moment, because outside of the context of that moment, it'll be all the more difficult and confusing for the child to understand it again. Does that make sense?
It does, and it leads to a great story that I'm actually going to share at the conference.
Great.
And I'll just give a very shortened version of it here. Is that during the lockdown, actually, I was, obviously we're very limited in the work that we could do, but our service thankfully remained open the whole time, and a lot of the work was around parent coaching. And what you have described is very much an intervention that a family actually used during the lockdown.
Fantastic.
Where at meal times every day they did this, where they actually did around the table, how are you feeling today? How did today go? What went well? What didn't? And for the first couple of weeks, the mother was really struggling with this because the children just didn't have the awareness, the understanding. But what she did was during the day, she'd take one of the children aside and say, look, I think you've done a really good job of this. Or do you see Mary's not feeling that well today? And I think this is what happened. And like during the course of the day, she would pull them aside and do little mini coaching sessions with them so that they would have the language to discuss that in the in round
at the meal time. Yeah.
Yeah, at the mealtime, yeah. And she said to me, I rang her like a few times, and she said, you know, it got to the stage where the children were looking forward to the end of dinner time, where they would sit around and have this, and they need that feedback.
Yeah.
Or a rehearsal all of the time. And it's the sort of thing that schools could be doing, but it's very important that they work in tandem with parents, and it's being done on an ongoing basis. It's not a one-shot saloon where you just do this activity once, it's tick the box exercise, done, on to the next thing. It has to be reinforced over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Because I suppose as children grow, emotions and feelings will change because they become more interested in other people, and potentially moving towards relationships and marriages and so on and so forth. And like there's no emotion will ever stay static. Always, things will always change, and things will always develop dependent upon the space that someone is in their lifetime. So it's really important. I suppose it's really important too that people do focus on the contextual piece of it, so that the child does develop a true understanding of this kind of feeling in my tummy, or why my hands are fisting, or do you know? So
and you know what you're just saying there, it's great. It would be really valuable and useful if a lot of this work is done before they were 11 years of age, because once the hormones set in, it's a completely different
unfortunately. Yes.
And that really sets off another chain of events for young girls. That might be the moodiness and the mood swings before they menstruate every month, and it could be, that the feelings that come with that. And there is a neurological basis to it as well, with the underdeveloped prefrontal cortex. So it's so important that we actually have the groundwork at the foundation stones done, because it can really be a bit of a wildfire if it's not sorted. You're nodding your head there, Sharon.
You're mentioning the underdeveloped prefrontal cortex. I sat side by side with my nearly 13-year-old only jeepers on Friday, driving into the local town here, and discussed with him where he couldn't escape, and discussed why things feel a little bit more emotional right now, and that this part of your brain is a little bit needs a little bit more time to develop, whilst this piece back here is more able, and so on. And by the time you're an adult, these will match up, but until then, and it actually worked. He kind of got it, actually, but it's that whole. It's a minefield, I suppose, isn't it? And it's a minefield for every parent, every single parent.
And for every teenager, it just makes it a bit more complicated. And I think that discussion that you had with him was wonderful. I think every teenager needs that. And I would say there's a great professor, Sarah Davidson, that works out of University College London, and she's written a very accessible book around helping parents understand that neurological development in teenagers, and it's certainly worth a read for anybody that might be interested in it.
Or who might be dealing with a pup that's giving out all of the time at the moment. I suppose, it makes it easier to navigate it and not argue or not fight. It makes it easier for us as parents to regulate our own emotional state around it when you kind of understand. So definitely, I'll actually put that up I'll put that up later, a link to the Sarah Davidson book, should anybody want to read more about it, I suppose.
And she's a very good YouTube clip as well, so I'll forward that to you as well.
Yes, please.
People aren't, I'm just thinking of those people who don't read, and we talked about it earlier, so it's important to think of those.
Perfect. I'll pop that up on the Facebook page, definitely. Can I ask you, Paula, what kind of, based upon that sensory piece then, what kind of proactive sensory supports can be put in place to make an environment more accessible? Now, when I think about classrooms, you're thinking about teachers who are trying to accommodate multiple different needs, I suppose. So are there any general kind of sensory supports that people could put in place? And then, I suppose, along with that, are there any other ones that you would recommend recommend based specifically around an auditory processing difficulty, or around a tactile sensitivity, or whatever the case may be?
I think certainly it is worthwhile for people to have a lens of doing an environmental audit. And I'm not talking about risk assessments, because that's all anyone's thinking about at the moment in this time of COVID. But certainly an environmental audit would be very valuable, not only looking at the health and safety needs of access in and out of the building, but also the health and safety needs of the impact that sensory difficulties can have on children, because people don't realise that there are sensory elements to the environment that actually cause inadvertent harm to children. And I know that comes across as something that's possibly a bit radical, but all of us that are old enough to remember the blackboards that were in classrooms, we remember nails getting scraped on that on those blackboards, and knowing how that felt for us and our teeth. For me, it's teeth chattering. It's also white styrofoam. I can't cope with that. And I think if people have had those experiences, and just imagine what it would be like to have those throughout the school day,
the time.
all of the time. It's only when you actually think of something that bothers your own sensory input that you think of being completely overwhelmed throughout the day. And you really need to be forensic around looking at the environment to see what suits. So I am going to disclose my personal biases now when I say this, but I really struggle with whiteboards in classrooms with children who have got sensory needs, because the fans can be very, very loud. Even something like, I mean, I know someone personally who the click-clacking of keyboards in a room can really bother them. We tend to have children that are using assistive technology. It might be a case of having to have a keyboard that's much quieter and softer than the hard clacky ones. And really, I would say that, it would be very valuable to talk to parents, and actually, if possible, and I think it would be wonderful if people could do this, that they'd ask the parents to come into the classroom, maybe on their own or with their child, prior to school year, maybe on a Friday evening, whenever it might be, and actually do a walkthrough from the front gate right through the classroom, and look at all the environments that they're in. It could be a case of something as simple as a running tap in a bathroom, that all they can think of here is that running water, and they cannot concentrate on their learning. As teachers, we have a responsibility to deliver the education to children and to support them to learn. They cannot concentrate if their sensory needs aren't at some level of homeostasis. It's just, it's not possible at all. So when they're meeting parents and they say the child is not progressing in school and we can't meet their needs, you're like, no, that is not the case. Every person has the potential to learn. I have worked with people that are profoundly disabled, and they have managed really well to develop great skills. Everyone has the potential to learn, and it is the responsibility of us to look at the environment to see where the barriers are to that learning. And it might not be a physical barrier, it could be a sensory barrier, and we need to be mindful of that. One very simple one I remember, just as an analogy, where we'd one little girl who had huge difficulties coming into school every morning, could not cope with school at all. And after a period of, we just thought the anxiety was throughout the school day, but it turns out that the only barrier was the crowds in the morning at the gate. All the people there, all the noise, the horns being there, parents shouting, saying goodbye, the unpredictability of it, and the school bell. And by the time she got into the classroom, she had nothing left in the tank. I was very distressed, totally exhausted. That internal regulation that we spoke about earlier, there was nothing there at all. Nothing left in the tank. And then there would be an expectation that that child would have to sit in the school all day, engage in a social world, engage in a learning environment, play environment. Very, very tough. And it was only through actually breaking it down with the child and actually having very open conversations with the parents that we realized that this was a barrier. And something as simple as a child arriving 10 minutes late in the morning, pulling up in the wheelchair accessible parking if it's empty, and if that's what needs to happen because there is a disability there, maybe not physical, but there is certainly a disability there, that they've access to that their SNA meets them at the gate and they walk in very quietly into the classroom. And that was a change in that child actually attending school and not attending school. Just leaving it for an extra 10 minutes in the morning changed that child's world. So we really do need to just be very, very mindful of the impact that the sensory environment has on individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, Paula, I would have done a lot of work in the last couple of years around that kind of environmental audit and modification and so on. And I know that I would have more recently, written up a program, the Oaks program, around equipping people with ways in which to audit the environment. But I suppose key to that whole program is actually, wherever possible, is including the autistic child's voice in that, and making sure that they are given every opportunity to share what is going on. If the child is presenting with an emotional or physical response, observing and taking note of the emotional and physical responses and everything around them when this is going on, so that even if the person is not able to articulate verbally, that we're still taking account of their voice. Because I think that when we include their voice, and when they're empowered with the knowledge that actually they have the power to change an environment or whatever, that then we're kind of instilling those beautiful first steps to self-advocacy as well as they get older, do you know? And I suppose the other thing, just to say, and I know it's something that I say time and again, and people are probably sick of me hearing me say it, but I come back always to the other strategy I come back to always, with regards to that kind of empty bucket, and we'd say having used up all of their spoons, that kind of disability literature piece, is Carrie Dunbaroon's mood induction technique, where she recommends that every morning when a child gets into school, that they have access for 10 minutes to their preferred sensory activity, and that it has to be available to them every single day as they come into school, that that it is not removed for any reason at all, that there is a level of predictability and consistency, because it creates that lovely feeling of safety within that environment. And it is a way in which to help regulate and to help, we'd say, bring somebody back down from a 4 on the 5-point scale back down to a 2, so that they've tipped some of the water out of their bucket and they can tolerate, they have the ability to cope with more again, or to be able to manage and emotionally regulate with a little bit more again, more of those demands again. Does that make sense?
It does. And actually the key part to that is it's actually a care need.
Oh, absolutely. That
You
it
know, and
can't
I
be
mean,
removed.
yeah,
It
it
has
cannot
to be
be
consistent.
removed.
Yeah,
It is a care need, and the
100%.
person cannot function without that.
Oh,
And for those of your listeners that are like within an Irish environment, and that whose children access an SNA in school, a special needs assistant, that their role is health and safety and care needs, and
yeah.
that's why that emotional regulation, it is so important that that is very explicitly stated and requested, and it is recognized as a care need for that person.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think I love the way that you're flipping the narrative, and you're not putting it down as a sensory need, but as actually as an essential care need. I think that if people start considering these kind of sensory needs as essential care needs, I think that then where people are going to be more inclined to engage with the activities that these children need. Do you
Yeah,
know?
and
So
it's a basic need. So a model that we would use in psychology is Maslow's
yeah,
hierarchy of needs. It has been around for the last 70, 80 years, but at the very first
that
level is that
foundation.
basic care needs.
Yeah,
And I mean, the reality is that if they don't have that sensory regulation and those care needs met at the very start, and it's as important as them having sleep at night, having their breakfast in the morning, having clean clothes to wear, they need to have their sensory needs
yeah.
met. And if that is done, then they can take off and they can learn and they can engage and actively participate. But if they do not have access to that, forget it. It's
Yeah.
just going to make life is going to be so much more harder for them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I suppose just to say too, Paula, that for those people, or for the that Maslow's hierarchy piece isn't just applicable to a child who is presenting with particular physical or emotional response, that this should be kind of best practice for every autistic child. Because the reality is that some of our kids, as you well know, will come in, they've got that really spiky profile where they will meet that kind of self-actualization piece at the top of Maslow's hierarchy for some of their day, and they'll hold it together so tightly. But there's a lot of the self-care piece that isn't being met throughout the day. They're the kids who come home and who break down and who become very exhausted and upset and so on and so forth. And they're also the kids who are more likely to present with that kind of autistic burnout or that mental well-being
Yes.
challenge as a result. So we do need to consider this as a strategy for every autistic child. Would that be fair to say?
It would be, and I call it the pressure cooker phenomenon.
Yeah.
So particularly those children that mask really well, both male and female, and in females we would recognize that as that camouflage effect, which is where we see girls who mask really well and they present with a higher level of anxiety, and then they become very surprised, and schools might be very surprised when they find out that actually the reason, the function for their behavior and what's really going on deep down in their core is that they're presenting with an autism spectrum condition. And these might be the children who hold it together all really well in school and then get into the car and they are in floods of tears.
Absolutely.
And, you know, the parents will ask them, how was your day? And they just cannot speak, or they'll say it was fine, and they don't have the emotional awareness to actually really describe how they're feeling, or that analogy of the street angel, house devil. People having that huge variation in behaviours in one context as opposed to another tends to be alarm bells for the professionals, because there has to be a reason why they're behaving in that way. Whereas if we think about how pressure cookers work, releasing that valve throughout the day, and really what that valve is, how that translates in the school environment, is that they have regular sensory breaks, and that you're doing those regular sensory audits with them. They might not recognize themselves that they might need it. Some teachers are amazing at it, intuitively getting this, sending them out for a break, sending them to the principal's office to do something, or like they might know it overtly or covertly. And it's just so interesting when that actually happens, and how a child's ability to regulate themselves can change so much by just virtue of the fact of building in small breaks during the day. And for some children, that's all they actually need to function.
Absolutely.
They're grand apart, you know, it's amazing how that can make such a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose picking up on your point that the child might get into a car and the parent asks, how was your day? And suddenly the child is in floods of tears or whatever. I suppose that speaks to how important it is that there is regular communication. And I know currently in the current climate that it isn't possible to use physical books to transfer from school to home and so on and so forth, but it's still essential that there is communication between school and home every single day, because that child is a 24-hour child. They're not two different people, one in school and one at home. We need to be making sure that their needs are met, both like in school to help support them at home and vice versa. So I suppose it's really important for any parents listening in that people would know that that it'd be important to establish some kind of an email system or a WhatsApp system or whatever, so that there's still that communication going on. I know currently with one of our young people here, rather than saying how's your day gone, what works best for them is to quite literally say, oh my goodness, you went to the polytunnel today. And it gives them the opportunity to speak and to share what's going on if they so choose. And if they're not ready to, or if they don't want to, that needs to be okay as well. But I suppose if they don't want to, it oftentimes will indicate to me that things are feeling a little bit more out of sync, and it allows for me then to put extra sensory strategies or whatever in place, and also to let the teaching staff know that, you know, things weren't perhaps as in sync as what they could have been the previous day, you know. So it's just really important that there is that balance and that kind of that nice communication between both school and home.
And this leads me on to a very interesting thing that's sort of great. It links very well with the previous story about the child getting the accommodations, going into school in the morning. The same goes for the evening time. For children that really struggle with that in the evening, sometimes it might be a case of them actually getting picked up 10 minutes before the school day ends. Or it could be that they don't get into the car until maybe 5 minutes after they leave, you know, that the yard calms down, they're picked up a little bit later. Or it could be that they actually have a sensory break and they do that sensory audit, that sensory check-in at the end of the day, where it could be just simply sitting at the bottom of the class, tuning in to classical music on earphones, maybe just using ear defenders for a few minutes, you know, just to help them just gradually transition to that leaving home in the evening, as opposed to just going out into a busy yard.
Madness,
that noise.
Absolutely.
We all know what that's like.
Oh, don't I know? And I suppose by the same vein as well, Paula, using the mood induction strategy as people come back out of the school to home and so on and so forth, it's a lovely transitionary piece that can be, it can support transitions very, very well. And I suppose with regards to transitions in general, now I suppose maybe you could talk a little bit about how best to support children in general, transitioning between activities and transitioning between different parts of the day, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Okay, so there's a few things I'd say about that. First of all, we all know the standard transition tools that work very well.
Yeah.
The visual schedules, the word lists. I know we say these all of the time. We just presume that they are done, and they're not always done.
Yeah.
And it's very important that people consider the age appropriateness and the developmental appropriateness of the schedules and how they're communicated to them. So, you know, to see a visual schedule in 4th class for a child that is typically development really is not appropriate. So it's very important that we take that in mind as we do it. So, and what I mean by that is having lists, either it's a pictorial list, a word list, to let them know what the timetable is during the day, so that at least they're prepared for transitions. So that's the first thing, communicating that in a way that is appropriate. I've seen some fabulous work done on transition work where teachers have been very, very creative. It could be that, for example, that the teacher would give the plan for the day in advance to the child.
Yeah.
So let's say on a Friday, they would get the plan for Monday. On the Monday, they get the plan for Tuesday, etc., etc. So that the parents can do that support around transition, let them know what the plan is.
Yeah.
So that works very, very well. Some people have used PowerPoint to do it. Some people have, I know I worked recently with a young girl, and I actually used a WhatsApp video when she was transitioning back into the clinical environment. She hadn't been there for a while. I knew that a lot of the changes in the environment with the masks, the PPE gear that we're using was going to be really difficult with her. So I actually did a video, WhatsApp video, spoke to the child, explained to them, you know, from the start of the building, going on what they would actually do. And I know from that mother that she told me that she watched it about 20 times before she actually came in. And the transition went so smoothly. And that would be if they were going to respite or going to the shop or any change that you need to prepare it in advance. So very important. The other piece around transition is that when you say you're going to do something and spend a certain amount of time, you have to do that and you cannot change that. And parents, like for young families and young mothers, you know, it's important that they socialize with other children and with mothers, great support. However, it is very difficult if the play date lasts too long, because it is doomed for failure and it won't last. So it's very important that you actually, prior to going into a shop or visiting a relation or whatever it might be that you're doing, you need to set an alarm on your phone, and you actually need to make sure that you stick to that plan and you know that it's time to go, and that you communicate that to the child, that when the buzzer goes off, you hear the chime on mommy's phone or whatever it might be, that you actually leave at that time. It's very important that we have ongoing predictability. I have used transitions with older children where we've actually programmed Fitbits, where little key alarms come up on Fitbits and they know what the next thing might be. It could be transitioning to, you know, I'm going to visit Granny's house and my Fitbit goes off 10 minutes advance and it sends me a warning, you know, go to the toilet, get a drink of water, get on your coat, and then we're going in the car. And you know that the young person can independently do that, and then that they are ready to transition. They have huge level of autonomy and support around that. There's many tools, you know, harnessing any sort of assistive technologies, using apps. There are so many of them. If you go on to Autism Speaks, they're always updating their apps list. You know, using Fitbits, using other forms of artificial intelligence is so important that they're used.
I suppose, I suppose just to let people know, really listeners who perhaps aren't as equipped with the information yet, that it is essential that we do support transitions, and every single transition, from using change cards to using possible change cards to using all kinds of timers are a parent's best friend and a teacher's best friend to. I know that I recently taught a group of further ed teachers, and quite literally, regardless of whether or not they were working with young adults or not, I did suggest very, very clearly that you write down, as you come into the classroom, you put your schedule, you write down exactly what the expectation is going to be for the class that we're going to cover X, Y, and Z, and if we have extra time, we're going to cover this too, so that it just creates a level of predictability. The information is non-transient, it's there, and they can refer back to it as many times as the student might like. I suppose the other strategy that we would would encourage our young people to use these days is quite literally a bookmark strategy, where if somebody is going out for a movement break, particularly as kids get older and they go into kind of the senior part of primary school or whatever, they don't want to be going out because they know that when they come back, they've got to sit back down to their seat, and they need to figure out exactly what's going on in class and so on and so forth. And literally having somebody write down the name of the book and the page number, so that when the young person comes back into class and sits down, that their peer hands them the piece of paper that says exactly what the page number is and so on. You're minding kind of anxiety levels in that way as well then, and again structuring and scaffolding that transition period. So I suppose there's millions of different transitionary strategies that we could suggest. I suppose that just to reinforce that the importance of scaffolding those transitionary periods wherever possible, not wherever necessary, but wherever possible, so that we're always setting the young person up for success rather than waiting until there's a crisis point because of a transition. Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the things I was just going to say in relation to that writing, there's this thing called a boogie board, and anyone that knows them will know they're brilliant. Anyone that doesn't, I would suggest that you have a look. It's a little LED board that I've used time and time again that has been really, really useful for managing transitions and communicating those. Just anything in an age-appropriate way. What I would say for parents that have children in primary school that are really struggling with transitions at the moment, it gets much easier at secondary level because they have timetables. The classes are only 40 minutes, 45 minutes, or an hour. The bell goes, they get up and they leave the room and they see another teacher. So if they're really struggling with that teacher, they know they're not going to be looking at this person every day for the whole year, that they're going to see a difference, and it works really well. Secondary school appeals much better to individuals on the spectrum than to primary a lot of the time, particularly if it's a year where the teacher and the student just might not get on very well. It happens to the best of us, but at least it does get easier, and that's what I would say, to families, not to lose hope.
Yeah, and we'll have to have another chat at a different time about how best to support that secondary school piece. That's a whole nother chat, Paula. So I'll catch you for that again at another time.
Okay.
Paula, I'm going to change tact a little bit and just ask you, how can parents and professionals support alternative non-verbal means of communication throughout an environment, or indeed make this form of communication viable in an environment?
This is a really great question and very multifaceted. What I would say is that, and I think I've said this already, that just because somebody is very articulate and can speak very clearly about their needs does not mean that from a communication point of view that they like talk all of the time.
Yeah.
There are people who love quiet time and they need quiet, and they're at that stage where they are what I call cognitively saturated. They've heard enough words for the day, they cannot hear any more words, but yet it's in a situation where maybe they're not that safe, and it's very important that you communicate something to them, but you cannot do it through words. And that resonates with children that might be having meltdowns, or young adults who are really, really struggling and very, very overwhelmed. You need to reduce your speech. And if you take nothing else from today, reduce your speech or do not speak at all until the person is in a stage where they're actually ready to talk. I worked with a young child years ago who's very, very able, really struggled with talking, actually, just that social interaction, just totally overwhelmed. I know that there was one day that we wheeled a car up and down to each other in a room, from one end of the room to the other, writing notes and using those non-verbal means. And I do appreciate the fact that there are people, like not everyone can actually read. You need to be very creative around ways that you can sort it out. There was one girl I worked with years ago who really struggled with the whole idea of words and language, and that when she actually wrote something down, it was on that piece of paper, and it was always on the piece of paper. And even if we ripped it up, she was so literal in her understanding that that message was still on the paper, even if it was shredded in a million pieces. And how it took a while, but we figured this out, that the best way for her to share if something was really bothering her, so that it would absolutely completely clean slate from her head, was that she would write it down a piece of toilet paper with a marker. And when she got that out and we had that session, I mean, I literally had sessions where we were writing on toilet paper, and at the end of the session she would walk out of the session and go into the toilet and flush everything down the toilet. And it was flushed away, it was disintegrated, it was gone. So you need to be very
creative,
creative about how this can actually work. The boogie boards have worked very well for me in the past. They're like etch-a-sketches. You write something down, you press a button, then it's gone. Using WhatsApp messages, writing little notes. I'm a great believer in the power of post-its. You know, literally leaving 1 or 2 words: when you're ready, I'm here, text me when you want to speak. We've had conversations with children where it's literally been WhatsApp talk, or that we're in a chat room and it's just myself and the other person in chat room. We're in the same room sitting on 2 laptops, and they're typing and I'm typing, and there is no speech. I've completed sessions where that has been the case, and it's worked really well. So the non-verbal means is very important, and I'm very mindful of the fact that this conversation is with people that are able to read and to type, and that isn't the case for all our individuals. So you really have to be very creative and see who the child is at, and see what they're meaning. I know somebody who actually talks best to their parents when they're playing Fortnite. That they actually go into the virtual world and they can actually communicate better through an avatar than they through the person. I've also worked with people who communicate so well with the use of puppets, that they literally, the puppet is them, but they visualize, they interpret it that the puppet is somebody else. But I've had great conversations with kids via puppets that wouldn't speak to me under other circumstances within an environment. So you really have to think about all these plethora of ways that you can use to get that across. Even teddies. How's Teddy feeling for a very small child that's bright? I mean, it's amazing what you can get through the power of play in that. So
and I suppose I'm mindful of adults that I'm supporting at the moment who would be non-speaking, or who might communicate using one word, and as a result they may present with they may communicate through the responses that they have then instead. And I suppose I suppose when I think about that individual, while we are trying to figure out ways in which to support those individuals to communicate to using their strengths, it's really, really important that we do proactively implement that kind of social decompression piece, where they have no social demands placed upon them at all, that they can be left completely alone, and that these need to be put in place proactively. So it's our responsibility to structure up the environment, to structure up classes, to structure up wherever we are, to facilitate their need to be alone. It's just just so that things don't become don't impact so greatly that by the time we figure out what's going on, that actually that there's been so much more damage done to this individual.
And it leads me on to the role of the psychologist in relation to working with individuals like that. I mean, often we've completed psychometric tests like IQ tests with individuals, and they might present as very bright cognitively, and they manage very well, but the one aspect of their working memory could be virtually non-existent. And what I mean by working memory is their capacity to listen to what someone has to say, to hold it in their head, and to actually do something with it. And I've met people who are actually in the gifted range, and their working memory is completely shot. It's not working at all, and it's very, very challenging in that environment for individuals. It's like a funnel effect. At the wide end, they've got all this potential, but there's only very little of that information that's actually getting through. And that time to process that, and in some ways to process in a different way, is really important. And it really means that you have to take your time, and you have to ask the person, observe the person, see how they respond to different environments. And it can be a challenge, and as you alluded to there, Sharon, it takes a while sometimes to sort this out, but time, it's important to spend the time on this.
100%, absolutely, 100%. Can I ask you, Paula, what kinds of challenges do autistic children so therefore face specifically attending a school environment? What kind of things should parents be looking out for? And what kind of things can we do, I suppose, as parents? I know you mentioned visual schedules, and you mentioned, like we mentioned, mood induction and sensory supports and so on. Is there any other recommendations that you'd have that we as parents or that we as professionals or educators can do to scaffold that child further so that they are absolutely given the most beautiful, equitable opportunity to realise their potential?
I think the big part is actually having a really supportive relationship with the school.
Yeah.
Be that from, leadership comes from the top, and you get a very strong sense of a school from the principal that is leading from the top, their interest in children with SEN, and their, the inclusive policies that are in schools. Every child has a right to be included fully within a school environment. And I would say that at the very start that it comes from the top, but also from a bottom-up perspective. Yes, you've your precious son and daughter starting in primary school, and it is a very daunting time for families. It is important to have wraparound supports that you that you can manage the transitions as best you can. It might be having a great childminder, having a really good creche, after school facilities to pick it up. These are things that are very important around that environment prior to even starting in school. And then just we've sort of answered probably a lot of this already around having good communicative channels of communication with schools, be that having an IEP, individual education plan sorted for the child, having regular updates from the school in relation to how the child is actually going. And the big piece, particularly in the early years, is actually developing those play skills. Children should be learning through play as much as possible in junior infant, senior infants and first class. Because let's face it, if these kids were in school in Norway, Sweden, a lot of the Scandinavian countries, they'd be out climbing trees and playing with their muddy welly boots, and wouldn't actually be sitting in a classroom till they were 7 or 8 years of age. So please lay off on the pressures of having to expect children to know all their Johnny phonics straight away. It will come when the child is ready, and be prepared for the fact that they are not going to learn well if they are very stressed out. So it is very important that they're relaxed and calm, and they get every opportunity to succeed at their level of ability and in their time. And that is really important going forward. You will have better years than others. That happens. I have friends of mine who have children on the spectrum, and some years are really great and some years aren't as good. But look, there's learning in those times of adversity when they're very hard and when things don't go well for you or for the child, because you learn from those difficult times, and you learn to appreciate then when the good times come. And having people that have an understanding of their needs, if your child has to access a special needs assistant, having a really good relationship with that special needs assistant, and ensuring that the role is very much health and safety and care needs around the regulation. There's so much that we could talk about this, but I think we've probably mentioned a lot of it already, Sharon. Maybe there's bits that I should have said.
You're literally saying things, and as you're saying things, there's at least 50 million other questions have popped into my head. So I'm actually going to make a note of another thing that I might talk with you when I'm going to talk with you later on about secondary school, because I think that it's like that we might organize another interview where we discuss education specifically from preschool right up to third level, if that'd be okay. So I'm taking notes. I'm taking notes of questions that I can ask you for our next interview. No pressure, Paula. Because I'm thinking of play, I'm thinking of Greenspan's floor time and all that, and I'm thinking about all these different strategies that can be utilized to engage a small person from the very, very start. So, but that's a whole nother conversation, because we'll be on for hours otherwise. Paula, can I ask you, what are you going to be covering at your talk for the Cork Autism Conference? Now, just to let people know, that is happening on the 11th of October, and it has been moved from a physical conference to an online conference. And I know that there's an absolutely wonderful array of speakers, yourself being in my top couple, to be fair. But what kind of things can people expect from you on the day?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, I'm really honoured to be asked. I was delighted when Cork Autism approached me to speak, and I got a bit of a hissy fit when I heard that I'm going on just before the great Temple Grandin. So we've got a lot to look forward to on the day, and absolutely no pressure at all for me. But anyway, that's for next week or the week after. But my talk, and it's something that has been a long interest for me, is the ethics of autism and ethical practice in general. I was very fortunate a few years ago to do a stint in Georgetown University. They have the Kennedy Institute of Ethics there. Yeah. So I spent some time actually engaging in reading and just reflective practice around the impacts of ethical practice for individuals that are on the spectrum. So I'm going to talk about that, about an ethical approach, particularly honing in on the rights of the autistic community.
Fantastic.
And leading on from that, I'll be looking at, quality of life and participation framework for inclusive support for functional planning across the lifespan. So what I mean by that is that currently we have, the AIMS program at early years in Ireland, which is great. We have access to, the National Council of Special Education supports at secondary level, and third level they've developed their own supports through disability offices, etc. But everybody is singing from different hymn sheets. If an individual engages in a clinical environment, they work off one model and one common framework. In education, it's very much an individual educational plan. And what I'm really trying to advocate is that we need to be looking at quality of life and participation across the whole lifespan, regardless of the context. So I'm going to be talking about how you can actually use a strengths and needs approach to actually model that, taking a very strong ethical approach to this, because let's face it, the history of individuals with autism have had quite a mixed past between, Asperger's history of working with the Nazis and all of that. And we really need to be mindful of what has come before so we can learn from the mistakes to make it easier for people going forward. And then finally, the last bit is that when I look at all this, and it might appear very highbrow at the start, I really will be lacing my talk with practical strategies that can be used in home environment, in schools environment, community environments, and for individuals that are adults.
Great.
And, it is only a 45 to 50-minute talk, so there's a lot in it, but I'm really excited about it, and
I am too. I have my ticket. I have my ticket purchased for ages. I'm really looking for. I'm actually very excited, particularly for your talk, because I suppose we hear so often about young people, preschool, play school, primary school, secondary school, and third level, and beyond that, there's very little that people have access to. Now I know here in Cork we've got a beautiful, fantastic service with Pat Nelligan, the Aspect, the adult support service. That's a whole of life service, but to my understanding, it is one of its kind in the country. It's not a service that is provided across the country, or indeed across Europe or the world. So I suppose it's going to be so refreshing to hear about autism from the whole of life, like the whole of life span for the autistic individual, and not just the individuals up to a certain age. So there's no pressure, Paula, to deliver, but you look
in 50 minutes, Sharon.
No, I know I am. I must say I'm looking forward to it, and I do think that people are going to find it amazing. I do.
Thanks.
Now, Paula, with regards to yourself personally, where can people find out more about you? Because I know a lot about you, but I'd love for other people to know so much more about you.
Well, I'm very bad. I don't have a Facebook or Twitter account. Maybe I should start enjoying that world. But I know if I did, I'd come obsessed and I get nothing done. So that's just a personal choice. But I mean, if you just Google my name, I have a LinkedIn profile. There's a little bit on that. And then I have a ResearchGate profile. So if you just do ResearchGate Paula Prendeville, you'll get a lot of my research papers up on that. And a lot of them are available to download. They're open access. So so that might be interesting. And I mean, people are welcome to contact me if they really want to as well. I'm very limited now in the time that I'm able to give, but if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to support.
Or if people want to, if anybody following this have any questions, they're more than welcome to send them on to me, and I'll field them to you just in the run up to the conference, so that you're not under so much more pressure than what you already are, because I know that you've got other pieces coming up, very important pieces as well. So I suppose I want for you to be able to focus on all of that really important important stuff that you're doing, along with being able to support people. Can I ask you, Paula, I know that you've completed a huge number of research projects over the last number of years, and we're lucky enough as a family that we were privy to being able to contribute to one of them in particular. But what kind of pieces, which of these pieces of research did you enjoy most, and why did you enjoy it most?
It's a lovely question, and it's a lovely story behind it. When I was working in the class that we set up in Cork, you know, in the early days, one of the mothers spoke to me about the role of the grandparents supporting the child with autism and supporting the parents themselves, and that resonated hugely with me at the time. So when I went back to retrain as a psychologist, I had to engage in a piece of research, and this was one that was very close to my heart. And I could see the value of grandparents. I was very privileged to have my grandparents around me as a child. You know, for the most part, my own children have their grandparents around, which is great.
Yeah.
And they are a very important part of a family system that largely goes neglected in the research, actually. So with that in mind, I actually ended up interviewing sets of families, and not only did I get the perspective of the grandparents themselves, but the perspective of the parents and the role that the grandparents had in their lives. So it was a real interactive two-way piece, and it was lovely. I have a great memory of sitting in a garden in Cork, looking over Cork one glorious evening with a set of grandparents, and there were rabbits jumping around our feet, and I was doing this interview and I thought, it doesn't get any better than this. But the final thing is obviously it was very well received, and I submitted it for peer review, and it got published in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders, which would be a very eminent journal. It was the first piece of research that I actually did that I got published, so I was tremendously proud of that. So I still am very grateful for those grandparents and families that were, to have the privilege to hear the stories. And I, since then, people have contacted me about it internationally, and have said that it's made a difference, and that was always, that's at the end of the day the most important thing, and a great story, I think.
Fabulous. And I know, Paula, in a very recent previous conversation, you were speaking about upcoming stuff. So do you want to let people know a little bit about what is coming up in your very near future?
Yeah, so the last year, during the lockdown, I wrote a professional ethics program for the British Psychological Society, along with the chair of the Board of Ethics in the BPS, and also the head of research in the Home Office in London. So we are going to be launching that now in the next few weeks, and I'm very excited about that. So that's been a sense of great pride to me. As well as that, I'm still doing some research with the School of Education in UCD around the ethical curriculum that's been rolled out in some of the Educate Together secondary schools.
Cool.
And I'm doing some of my own research as well on professional ethics with educational psychologists. So ethics is sort of taking up a lot of my brain space at the minute outside my regular working week. So it's great.
Fab. I can't wait to hear.
Oh,
but you know what? I suppose it's great to have somebody so passionate and so forward thinking contribute and lead the area, put us on the kind of map as a country who actually have very proactive and positive and very, very, very forward thinking individuals in that field. I can't wait to hear about the upcoming projects that you'll be contributing to, because I think that they will absolutely influence and change the shape of education for autistic individuals and education in general, and not only that it will also change the way in which psychology starts to work in the autism field as well. So it's really, really exciting. There's some hugely exciting times ahead, Paula, for you. Definitely.
Thank you very
it's
much,
very
Sharon.
exciting. It is. Now, you'll be glad to know, Paula, for today, I'm on to my final question with you, but I will catch you to come back on the show again. So can I ask you, Paula, given your wealth of experience as a professional in the field, and given your professional and personal experience based upon your time in education and so on, and now given all of this wonderful work that you're doing in ethics, what would you believe is the most important piece of advice that you could give to my listeners who are undergoing their own autism journeys, be that an autistic individual, a parent of an autistic person, an educator of an autistic person, or whomever else?
There's a few parts to this answer.
Yeah.
The first thing is that I will actually quote an African proverb, and I know Hillary Clinton used it as one of her recent book titles, that it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, I would say, and this kind of emanated from the research that I did on grandparents, that it does take a village. And what I mean by that is that every family with a child with autism, they need to have identify their circle of support. They need to recognize their wraparound, the comfort blanket, the people that are there for them to support them on that journey. And you need to be very discerning about those people, because when a child gets diagnosed with autism, you find out who your friends are very quickly.
Yeah.
And you often end up developing a new set of friends, and maybe ending up becoming friends with somebody that you never would have imagined in a million years that they would be part of your social circle, and become possibly one of your nearest and dearest and most valuable colleagues and supporters, going on this journey. So what I would say to you is to take your time. You need to mind yourself. And that is the key part, because if you are not in a good place yourself, you're not in a place to be able to support your child. So I know people say, how can I put myself first? Go for walks, go for a cup of tea, just give yourself a bit of headspace. I would say that is a single most important thing. Mind yourself first, identify your circle of support and that wraparound supports. And please, 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 and I cannot say this strongly enough, be very careful with the snake oil salesman. And that is the message that I take from the end of the day. There are lots of people that are making money out of autism, and it is not for the greater good. And certainly some of their practices would be considered unethical if they were to come in front, if they're really to break down. Be very careful of those. There's a lot of wonderful interventions out there that are freely available that work incredibly well for very young children. And I am thinking, for example, transporters, that Simon Baron-Cohen did years ago in the Centre for Autism in Cambridge. It's brilliant. It's on YouTube. It works really well for very young children and helping them to understand their emotions at the early stages. I'm thinking of the zones of regulation. It's, if you can't afford to buy the book, even just Google it on Google Images. There's great supports there. Be very, very careful who is peddling that where. I mean, Sharon, for you, you're living, breathing, eating, speaking, sleeping autism, and have done for a very long time. And your listeners are very fortunate they have your level of expertise to tap into if they need to. But unfortunately, there are a lot of other people out there that are not experts. Please be very careful that the person that's giving you the advice is qualified to give you advice, albeit that their life experience and a huge amount of it, and I know you've done a lot of courses as well, Sharon, or that they are professionals themselves and that they are accredited professionals, because there have been in the past people that have been doing assessments and doing interventions that were not fully qualified, and that caused a huge amount of concern and difficulty for families going forward. So I would say too, for a lot of families, it does get easier. It might not be that you have this image of what your child's lifespan and development may be. It could be different, but it comes with a great amount of joy and a great amount of privilege. And that's not discounting the huge challenges that there are, but I mean, you are the best advocate for your child, and just really mind yourself. And I know there's probably a lot more that I could say, but that's it for now, I think.
Paula, you're an absolute gem. Thank you so, so, so much for coming on the show today. I can't wait to have another chat with you in the coming weeks, hopefully.
That's great, Sharon. It's been an absolute privilege as well, and thank you for inviting me onto the show, and best of luck to all your listeners.